Hello. For those of you who are interested in history, and particularly in the history of women's suffrage, I wanted to offer you another opportunity to do some extra credit before things get really fun, possibly crazy this semester. So, I wanted to tell you about a woman suffragist and abolitionist named Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. I've made this sway presentation about Harper that I'll switch to full screen. And, excuse me, I'll tell you a little bit about her. She was born in 1825 and she died at the end of the 1900s from heart failure after a really busy life as an abolitionist to fight against slavery, but also as someone who fought for women's rights. She was a well known poet, novelist, and orator. And you can learn a lot more about her from this 6-minute YouTube video if you play this sway presentation and then just click on the arrow there. As a woman suffragist, she continued to work with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony after the Civil War. She had also worked with the American Anti-Slavery Society and with these two women and Frederick Douglass before the Civil War to fight against slavery. Stanton and Anthony started a newspaper called The Revolution to protest essentially against the changes that were happening in the United States after the Civil War. Although they didn't outright protest emancipation and the freedom of Black people, they started to agitate against the 15th Amendment or the 14th Amendment and voting rights for Black people, as well as the 15th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. There is supposed to be a link to a study from Ken Burns, the well-known PBS documentary maker, but I will add that onto our Blackboard site, in which he talks about Harper for about 3 seconds in his discussion of the women's suffrage movement. And I find that incredibly unfair. So here we have the excerpt from their newspaper in which the debate over women's rights and African American rights comes to a head. In that debate, Susan B. Anthony refers to Black men as tyrants, and several people talk about Black men abusing their wives and not being capable of voting, and suggests that it would be better for white women to vote on behalf of Black people. And if Black women know anything, that they learn it from their mistresses. So, amidst all this highly racist discussion, Frances Harper speaks up and says, just read the resolution again, and tries to get people under control. Susan B. Anthony tries to interrupt her. Douglass stops Anthony from interrupting Harper. And then Harper says, when it's a question of race, I'll let the lesser question of sex go. But the white women all go for sex, letting race occupy a minor position. And she also asked Stanton and Anthony if their demands for the rights of working women would include Black women. And they said, of course, yes. And then Harper went on to tell a story about how when she was in Boston, there were 60 white women who rose up and left work because one colored woman went to gain a livelihood in their midst. And Harper reiterates, if the nation can only handle one question, she will not have Black women put a single straw in the way if only the race of men can get what they want. And essentially what she's saying here is not that Black women don't want rights, but rather if they must choose, they have greater trust for Black men to support them and ensure their rights than the trust that they don't have for women like Stanton and Anthony. So if we think about what's going on today in politics and the question of women's rights versus Black women's rights, why isn't the intersection of women's rights and Black women's rights a good place for people to collaborate. A few years ago, millions of women marched with pink cat ear hats on their heads. And now we have protests for Black lives. Why don't women stand with Black women? Why don't all women stand with Black women? I just made the mistake of saying women and meaning white women, as if white women don't have a race too. And I also wonder if any other female politician gets insulted in the way that Kamala Harris gets insulted. There is a lot to be said about sexuality and hypersexuality. In the early women's suffragist claims that Black men would be free to rape white women if they could vote. And now we have a Black woman running for vice president, and immediately her greatest flaw is her sexuality. So there is certainly I hate to say it, there's certainly an underlying theme here that has not gone away. So let me quickly draw your attention to the version of this story that is the dominant version, not including Frances Harper.
Progressive allies form the American Equal Rights Association, dedicated to voting rights for women and men, blacks and whites. No country ever has had or ever will have peace until every citizen has a voice in the government, Stanton declared. Now, let us try universal suffrage.
Dear Susan, I have argued constantly with the whole fraternity, but I fear one and all will favor enfranchising the Negro without us. Women's cause is in deep water. There is pressing need of our Women's Rights Convention. Come back and help. There will be a room for you. I seem to stand alone.
After the war, Susan B. Anthony had gone west to Leavenworth, Kansas to visit her brother Daniel. She was in his office one day in August of 1865 when she read disturbing news from Washington. A proposed 14th Amendment put forward by the Republicans promised citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. But for the first time, the Constitution would also include the word male. Only men, it seemed to say, were citizens. Only men could vote.
She was furious. She had the anger of anyone who knows that their cause is right, is good, is just, and has been slapped in the face with a worse kind of injustice.
Anthony packed her bags and boarded the next train for home. She and Stanton were about to run into cold political reality.
In very few places was the Republican Party such a strong majority in the North as to be able to ignore political realities and be a party purely of idealism and say, yes, equal rights for all. They had to play and watch and respond to public opinion. The women are the easiest to dispose of because they don't have any votes. It is the final dilemma of the whole history of the women's suffrage movement that you're trying to affect political outcomes without having the currency that controls political outcomes.
Stanton and Anthony lobbied hard to have the language of the amendment changed. If that word male be inserted as now proposed, Stanton confided to a friend, it will take us a century to get it out again.
So I will put the link and you can follow this story by watching the video yourself. But my questions that I would like you to think about here have more to do with Harper and have more to do with the question of why there must be an either-or question between women's rights, universal rights, and Black women's rights. So please watch the video Embedded in This Way, and also the video that gives a very different version of Frances Watkins Harper's contribution to that debate. And there will be a brief quiz and a discussion to help you earn some extra points as you explore this question. Have a great day.